Holy shit, it's a grizzly. Shut up, whispered I. I crawled over to a gap in the shrubbery to see better. I asked Richie to hand me his binoculars. It took a few seconds to find it. There was a large brown spot visible on the hill. I focused, and when the edges became clear, there was no doubt. It was a freaking huge bear. I watched him for a long minute. His head was turned to the side. He was just standing in one spot. I figured he was probably about to nibble one of the many blueberry bushes in the neighborhood. But that was odd. Even if it was eating in one spot, you'd think there was some movement. And this thing looked like a statue. Richie picked up the binoculars again. "What's it doing?" he asked. "I know. It's weird," I said. "Watch out for the cubs. Maybe she's acting weird because she can smell us." But we're on the leeward side. With these thoughts, we sat there for about 20 minutes, just watching and getting more confused by the second. Richie was starting to get worried. "We have to do something," he said. "Like what?" "I don't know, but we have to keep moving if we want to make camp before dusk. And we sure can't go back to the car now, because then we'll definitely be walking in the dark." Even armed with a big can of May, we both began to fear that the bear might be rabid or something. There was an entire soccer field before us, but grizzlies can cover that distance faster than a running human. It was too close to the trail to keep going. "Okay, I'm going to try something," said Richie, pulling out a pneumatic siren. "Are you serious? You got a better idea. That should scare away everything in a 5-mile radius." He was right. I didn't have a better idea, at least at the time. Now I wished I'd said to just turn back to the car and drive all the way home, not even stop to pee. We can use empty bottles, for that matter. They say some bells can't be removed. Turns out the same can be said for air horns. God help us. Richie pressed the button and let out this horrible scream. Nothing happened. The bear didn't move an inch. Richie gave it a few more times, so long and loud that by the end of it we were dizzy. We started up the trail in a daze, dragged along by the animal despite all our natural instincts. At this point, we just needed to know, why isn't he moving? We moved closer, both of us aiming our bear cans, ready for the slightest twitch. But there was none. We pulled ourselves up and turned around to face him. It was like a dream. It was staring at us, a mouth open with yellowed teeth, sharp enough to tear through bone, and an outstretched paw with claws so long they didn't even look real. None of those things were real. Not really. Because it wasn't real. That is, it wasn't alive. Not anymore. It was a stuffed animal. What the hell is going on here? Richie threw a rock at it, just to be sure. It bounced off the bear's unblinking glass eye. We couldn't help ourselves. We started laughing. It was so weird, but at the same time very cool. "This must be the place for the camp photo shoot," said Richie. "Haven't you heard of it?" asked me. Richie pulled out his cell phone to Google it, but predictably, there was zero connection. We were far away. Instead, we just embraced the idea and took selfies with the grizzly. So damn ignorant and stupid, not thinking about the fact that we were standing next to one of the biggest predators on the planet, but someone had killed it. What hope did we have? After surveying every possible Instagram angle, we continued deep into the forest. Judging by the map, the campground was still a few miles away. It had to be one of those shared cabins that any hiker can use. This trail is not like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Trail, where many people pass through every year. I hadn't even heard of it. This is all thanks to Richie and his obscure internet research. He's always trying to find something off the beaten path, a something cooler than everyone else. After that, things were good for a while. We got back into our usual rut of not wasting time and wrote off the bear as being kind of unserious and fun. Then came the meadow. And the deer. There were 12 of them. White-tailed. 10 doe and 2 males. None of them moved, always grazing among the wildflowers. They looked at us with their big black doll's eyes. This time we didn't wait. It was immediately obvious that they were also fed up. We got off the trail and walked among them, stroking their painted wet faces and frozen wiggly tails, touched the large horns meant to attract mates. Was it the same thing? Was someone trying to lure us in? You mean none of the sites mentioned them? I asked. Richie shook his head, half in amazement, half in fear. Who did this? Said I. We took pictures again, though our smiles were much more forced. If this was just some weird tourist trap, it was losing its appeal. Quickly, we walked on. The squirrel took forever to find acorns. The raccoon was climbing to treetops he would never reach. Birds sat silently on branches with songs lodged in their feathery throats. A coyote, howling, waited for a moon he would never see. I asked to go back. I didn't like this anymore. It wasn't right, but the sun was setting, and neither of us wanted to walk back in the dark, even though the forest seemed completely devoid of real life. Both predators and victims. Finally, we reached the campground. All that was there was a campfire and a small shed. Not a real hut. I was really hoping for something with a lockable door, but once we got the fire going, the fear subsided a bit. It was supposed to be a week-long hike, but we both decided we would head home in the morning. I couldn't wait. I counted down the hours, trying to sleep. I couldn't hear a cricket or an owl. We were awakened by a buzzing sound. It was so high-pitched that it must have been on the verge of being audible to human ears. It was deep into the night. The fire was burning faintly, barely, but as I looked around, I saw another glow coming from the forest. The pines glowed a white-green, pulsing light, and something mechanical pulsed in my head. Richie and I looked at each other, confused and frightened looks frozen on our faces. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream and not stop until I was safely in my bed. I wanted the ruby shoes to just click and disappear from this moment. But all I had were dirty shoes. There was nothing left for us to do but huddle against the back wall of the awning and pray for it to end. I closed my eyes and asked God to save us. It seemed we were not alone. The sky began to fill with the screams of dead or dying creatures. They were howling with primal fear, trying to free themselves from whatever was out there behind the trees. I don't know how long it went on. It seemed like it would never end. And then suddenly, it was morning. I don't remember falling asleep again. It was as if someone had turned on the light, and here I was. And Richie was gone. He wasn't anywhere in the camp. I ran back down the path in the direction we had come from. I kept shouting Richie's name, but there was no answer. My legs and lungs were burning. I was ready to do this all the way back to the car. I wasn't going to stop. But then I did stop. I had no choice. I rounded a bend in the trail, and there stood Richie, looking at where the rest of the trail used to be. Now there was a wall of thorny shrubbery 12 feet high and impenetrable. It stretched into the forest on either side of the trail, with no end in sight. Richie's arms, legs, and face were covered in bloody scratches as he turned to face me. "I think we're lost," he said without any emotion. He dropped the crumpled map from his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "This was supposed to be fun." Back at camp, I treated Richie's wounds with the first aid kit and tried to navigate the map. There is only one trail in and one trail out. Since the way back was closed, we would just have to move forward. A few hours' walk ahead was a small town. The note said it was a good place to stop for supplies, as it was the only civilization for a few days. That's where we headed. Not that we had any choice. I walked in front. Richie was practically in a catatonic state. He walked behind, completely silent. His fears seemed to have vanished, replaced by something worse. He was determined to accept whatever fate had in store for him. I tried to talk to him about what had happened that night, tried to theorize about our situation, but all I got in response was a dummy look. He must have been in a state of shock. I know he was. As we walked, we continued to encounter all sorts of woodland creatures. Rabbits stood next to their dead burrows. A rattlesnake drew back to strike with its mute maracas. A pack of wolves circled around an old elk, towering so high that its antlers touched the branches of the surrounding spruce trees, covered in sawdust. His hide was moth-eaten and peeling in places. How long ago had this dramatic scene taken place? Years? Decades? Our feet carried us kilometer after kilometer. Our minds were numb. Each new picture of the natural world was even more incredible than the last. We hardly noticed anything anymore. The first thing I saw was the steeple of the church. A white tower with a gleaming cross shining in the midday sun. It looked like hope. Appearances can be deceiving. We ran the last few hundred yards to the edge of town. The trees gave way to neat manicured lawns and a small main street of brick and storefronts. Richie and I felt the trance lift away from us, and tears ran freely down our cheeks. We had always thought of ourselves as forest people, much happier in nature than among humans. Now I felt like I could kiss the first stranger I met. But it didn't turn out that way. There was still no cell service, so we headed for the gas station, hoping there was a phone or an understanding clerk there. We were in the middle of a vast emptiness, but there was a road, which meant someone could pick us up. I saw a dilapidated booth and picked up the phone, but to my surprise, there was no dial tone. Fantastic. We walked into the station store. The fluorescent lights were humming. The radio was playing old country music from a skinny speaker, but the man behind the counter said nothing. When I asked if we could use the phone, he ignored us. So much for small-town charm, I thought, wishing he was just being rude. Perhaps he had once been like that. I'll never know. All I know is that when I approached the counter, his bloodshot eyes didn't blink. His greasy, bearded mouth made no attempt to speak. His fingers worked the cash register for customers he couldn't see. He smelled faintly of formaldehyde and leather. He was just another stuffed animal, the work of a skilled taxidermist. A trophy. I fainted. When I came to, Richie was sitting on the floor next to me, with a sour pile of vomit lying next to him. "Sorry," he said. Couldn't help myself. I could barely see him through my tears. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "Maybe it's okay," he said. "It could be some kind of weird art installation. Or a prank." No, it's not," I said. "Yes, I know." We gathered our strength and stood up. We checked the phone behind the counter with the same result, just as dead as the clerk. We walked out into the middle of the deserted street like gunmen at noon, mace cans in our hands instead of guns. We did the only thing we could do. We looked around. Every corner, every building was an intricate work of the commonplace and the everyday. There were children playing in the front yard, one of them ready to throw a bleached and deflated red ball. The mailman seemed to whistle as he worked, and the dog barked at his intrusion. The butcher was slicing a lacquered ham on a slicer not even plugged in, and his wife was smiling, and seemed to be asking him not to make it too thin. Dull-eyed drivers sat in cars that never finished turning into their driveways. Families prayed over food that had gone cold but would never go bad. We sought help at the police station. It was like a scene from the Andy Griffith Show put on pause, only if Andy and Barney's skin had turned waxy, green and gray. I borrowed a walkie-talkie from one of the officers, having no idea what the range might be, but figured it was worth a try. I really hope someone can hear this right now. It's hard to imagine there's anyone out there right now, but if there is, tell my family that I love them, and I'm sorry. Richie and I decided to spend that night at the church. I don't know if I ever believed in God, and I probably believe less now than I ever did, but it seems like if there was ever a time to pray, it was now. The people in the pews, all in their Sunday clothes, even though it's Tuesday, look serene. The preacher seems to be yelling about fire and brimstone, but they don't seem to mind. They are all models of serenity. I want the same thing they do. Tranquility at the gates of hell. I wake up from a dream. It was beautiful and noisy. So much beautiful noise. Traffic, honking horns, and rude drivers. TVs with annoying daytime shows. Kids playing, dogs barking. Rap music, country music, rock and roll blasting out of the speakers. People laughing, crying, screaming. There was a lot of screaming. Was that Richie? I run out of the sanctuary and into the street. It's bright outside. There's not a cloud in the sky. Just blue. So much blue. With a sky like that, nothing can go wrong. Richie is standing there looking at it too, soaking it all in. The whole thing was just nightmarish. So silly what the trail can do to your head. What a day it's been, Richie. Isn't it amazing? He doesn't answer, but I understand. Sometimes this world and everything in it can overwhelm you. When I was a kid, I learned a verse from the Bible. Be still and know that I am God. He is. He's just stunned that it's all so amazing. It has to be. It has to be. I'm just going to leave it for a while. We'll both just be calm.